All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We're excited to get started. I'm Dr. James Coombe. I'm the Vice President of Student Affairs here at the Northeast Campus. It's wonderful to see you all as we continue the Tarrant County College Northeast Campus Fall Business Lecture Series, where we bring together students, faculty, and community members to explore the trends and ideas shaping today's business and economic landscape. This week's session tackles a topic that's on everyone's mind: in this economy, challenges and opportunities in the current U.S. economy. This title alone captures the questions many of us ask daily as we navigate rising costs, evolving job markets, and rapid shifts in technology and policy. We're incredibly fortunate to have with us Dr. William Crowder, Professor of Economics and Chair of the Department of Economics at the University of Texas at Arlington. Dr. Crowder is a distinguished scholar and an engaging speaker whose research and expertise focus on monetary policy, financial markets, and macroeconomic trends. He has a remarkable ability to make complex economic concepts accessible and relevant, something we're all looking forward to today. As you listen, I encourage you to think about how these national and global forces connect to your own academic, professional, and personal goals. Conversations like today's help us to become more informed citizens, better leaders, and more adaptable professionals, skills that are essential in today's economy. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. William Crowder.
Thank you. Is this coming through? Beautiful. Well, look, the title of the talk today is sort of opportunities and what was this? The opportunities and challenges. And I do these kinds of talks in front of groups like yours a lot, and showing up talking about real GDP growth and inflation and unemployment doesn't really resonate mostly with most of these types of groups. So I came prepared to talk about that at the end. If you want, I'm happy to answer any questions. It is, as the professor said, my area of expertise. But I wanted to sort of prepare a talk that I thought would be more appealing and maybe resonate a little bit more with the audience. So one of the things my colleagues and I over the years have sort of lamented is that we send young people out into the world, 17, 18, 19 years old, to make huge consequential decisions about the rest of their lives, and we never give them any of the tools necessary to make those decisions. We just sort of hope that they'll figure it out. And it turns out that economics is itself a science about how to make decisions. That's ultimately what economics is. Because resources in the world are scarce, and resources defines a lot of things, including time, right? Because those resources are scarce, we have to make decisions about which ones to use at what time and what's the best use for them. So the point, though, is that economics is a science of decision making. And as a consequence, I think that there's a lot of benefit from young people like yourselves, people at whatever stage of life you're at, to sort of understand the economics way of thinking about issues. And then that will sort of help inform you to make better decisions in your own life. I can tell you from my own experience, that's true. I'm not saying that the economics way is exactly the right way. Indeed, what we're going to talk about a little bit here is the economics way is based on rational behavior. That is, we assume people are going to do what's best for themselves under the circumstances. The problem is we're dealing with human beings. They're not perfectly rational. As a consequence, there's another aspect to this that we call behavioral. And that's based on essentially, what are your preferences? What is it that you really want? And so what I want to get across today in the two examples I'm going to talk about is that the economics way of thinking is a benchmark. It's a benchmark from which to compare your own decision making. And then from there, you can decide, are my preferences strong enough that I should overcome what the benchmark tells me is the right decision? Or should I just follow what the benchmark tells me? And I can tell you, following the benchmark, I think works most of the time. Okay, so let's proceed. So congratulations, you're facing a lot of decisions in your life, and almost all of them are about the future. And the problem with the future is it's uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. So for economists, what we do is we assume people have to form expectations. You kind of form a little model in your head, a little idea about how the world works, and then you predict the future in some sense from that model. That's how economists do it as well. What I want to talk about today, as I just said, I want to talk about how economists might go about making these kinds of decisions. And I'm going to use two examples, and they're big examples. They're sort of consequential decisions that people make in their lives. And I want to reveal how an economist might approach those decisions and maybe come up with a better outcome. So the first secret that economists learned a long time ago, like over a century ago, John Marshall, right? He learned that the consequential decisions, all decisions that are important to us, they must be made at the margin. So what does that mean, made at the margin? So let me give you an example. My dean of my college used to work at Hunt Industries, an oil services firm owned by a guy named Ray Hunt. Ray Hunt wants all his employees to be super happy. So they did an employee survey. And at the end of the survey, they found out 90% of the employees are super happy. 10%, they had issues, right? So Ray Hunt says, hey, I want 100% happiness. Well, here's the problem. At what cost? To make the 10% happy, he was maybe going to have to triple or quadruple their salaries, right? Do something that was super costly to make them happy. And was it worth the extra 10%, right? On the other hand, if it was simply a matter of Ray Hunt putting free coffee available into the break room to make that other 10% happy, well, that cost is really low. And so, of course, it's as they say, a no-brainer. Go ahead, let's spring for the free coffee and get the extra 10%. The point is the decision for Ray has to be made at the margin. How much does he want to spend to get that extra 10%? It's the 10% that matters, right? It's that marginal difference. And the decision-making that economists have essentially shown to be true that works is we keep wanting to do something as long as the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost, right? So Ray can keep providing services or higher salary or whatever to the employees as long as the benefit he gets, which is the increased satisfaction of his employees, exceeds the expense that he's making to get that benefit, right? It makes perfect sense. In equilibrium, the two should be equal. That is, I do all the good things, the beneficial things, up to the point where the cost of doing another one of those beneficial things is just canceled out by the benefit that I get. At that point, I'm going to stop doing that thing. So, for example, eating pieces of pizza, right? Slice of pizza. That first piece is really good. Second piece is pretty good too. Third piece, okay. Fourth piece, uh-oh. Fifth, sixth, right? The idea is if you keep going on, the benefit gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and the cost actually start to rise. So the idea again is marginal cost equals marginal benefit is where we all would like to be. We'd like to be right on that beautiful equilibrium. As I say, it's the secret to a happy life. Okay. First key concept that we have to understand is opportunity cost. Every decision comes with an opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is just what it is we gave up to make the decision we made. So if we choose choice A, then the opportunity cost would be the next best alternative. So if choice B was that alternative, then that's our opportunity cost. If you take a job in Austin for $100,000 a year, and you give up a job in Dallas for $99,000 a year, what's your opportunity cost? $99,000 a year, the job you didn't take, right? The opportunity you didn't take. So again, opportunity cost is very important. The reason it's important is because oftentimes we ignore it. Oftentimes we ignore the implicit opportunity cost. For example, as I say here in the blurb on the screen, the cost of attending college isn't just the tuition and the fees and the books, it's your time. Because you could be out working right now, earning income, right? That's part of the cost of attending college. The second concept that we have to sort of wrap our brains around, and it's really important, and I'll spend a few minutes on this, the time value of money. So it turns out that money to be received today is worth more to us than money to be received sometime in the future. Now, the primary reason given for that is that Well, we could take the money today and we could do what with it? We could invest it, we could save it, and we could earn the interest. And so that by the time we would receive the money in the future, the money we got today would be worth more, right? Because we'd earn the interest on it. But the real reason that interest is even paid on those kinds of loans is because human beings are impatient. Human beings prefer to have what they want sooner rather than later, right? And as a consequence, what that means is we discount the future. That is, the future, if today is worth 100, then the future is only worth 98, right? We discount the future. There's a lot of reasons for that. One is the future is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't even know if we'll be there in the future, right? So the idea is that discounting the future is a perfectly rational thing to do, right? Because of the uncertainty associated with it, we don't know if we're going to be there. So human impatience is not a bad thing, okay? The key, though, is how impatient are you? If you're really impatient, then that means you discount the future a lot. So today's worth 100, right? Next year is only worth 50. That's a 50% discount, right, in terms of the future. On the other hand, if somebody's very patient, you know, their future is just as important to them as the past, or excuse me, the present. The past, of course, can't do anything about. Then in that case, 100 today might be worth 98 to them in the future. The point, though, is discount rates, how we discount the future, how we value time, and the value of time is your preference. That's a preference that each individual has. Every individual has their own internal discount rate, or what economists call rate of time preference, right? Now, again, the time value of money is also related to the idea that money that you get today can be invested. Let me just show you the effects that this time value has. So what we're doing here is we're taking $20,000 today and we're seeing what the equivalent would be if you were to receive it at some point in the future. So for example, if you had $20,000 today, what would that be worth to you to receive today to get the same amount in the future? For example, 1 year from now. Well, at a 5% discount rate, meaning that every year the future is worth 5% less to you than the present is, at a 5% discount rate, the $20,000, right, that you would get 1 year from now, that's only worth $18,000 to you today. So that's what these numbers are here. These numbers here tell us what the value is today of $20,000 to be received that many years in the future. To receive, if I'm going to receive it 9 years in the future, $20,000 in the future is only worth $14,500 today, right? Because again, the future gets discounted. But what happens if I discount at a higher rate? Well, this is now being discounted at 20%. Discounting at the higher rate leads to what? Leads to a huge decline in the present value. That is, the more you discount the future, the less is the present value. So again, it's a very important concept here. These discount rates are closely tied to concepts like interest rates in the economy. So the last concept that we'll introduce here is the rate of return. And this is very common, so this one shouldn't be that much of a new concept, right? The rate of return is simply the annual percentage increase in the value of a particular asset. So, for example, if we looked at the stock market overall, its average annual rate of return is about 10% per year, right? So, again, that doesn't mean every year it goes up 10%. It just means that on average, over long periods of time, in this case, 30-year period. Why did I choose 30? This is the same length as a mortgage, so I'm comparing it to a mortgage here in a minute. But the idea is, right, that the stock market returns about 10% a year. On the other hand, house prices rise at about 4 to 6% per year, depending on the region of the country you live in, okay? What about a college degree? Well, it turns out that the return to a college degree is about 10 to 15% each year of education, right? So each year you're in school, the return to that is about 10 to 15%. So the idea again is these concepts will help us form the basis to make the economics decision. And then from there, we can compare it to what our preferences tell us. So let's talk about the economics of housing. I don't think the world's changed that much. When I grew up, owning a house was sort of, one of the steps on the ladder to the American dream, right? The success story in life was eventually you want to own a house, right? And so it's sort of built into the American way of life. Does that make sense, though? Is owning your house, is that the right economics decision to make? And I'm going to show you some interesting results here that I think are going to tell you no, right? It turns out that there are, again, a decision to be made here. If I go and buy a house today, the entire all-in cost of the house every month is going to exceed what I would have to pay to rent the same house. You can see this on Zillow yourself right now. You go out to Zillow and you can see that there'll be a house and it's for sale or rent. And the purchase price, once you throw in all the costs, will be something, $3,000 a month, but the rental rate will only be $2,500 a month, right? And so the question becomes, is paying the extra money every month to own the house, is that worth it? Does that make economic sense based on marginal cost, marginal benefit? So let's look at an example here to sort of flesh out the decision making. So there's two guys, Alex and Sam. They both have $50,000 saved up, and they're looking at $500,000 houses. Now, on one of these, there it is. I don't know if they make the slides available to everybody, but right here, I did a little. Oh, does it not let me? Control click. It's supposed to be a hot link. So what I did was I created a little app. I didn't create it. What am I saying? Claude. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Claude. It's one of these AI LLM tools. Again, strongly encourage you guys to be playing with these things. Interacting with these models, I think, is going to be extremely important to function in the economy going forward. But the point, though, is if you can, there we go. Beautiful. Okay, so this little app was written by the AI model, and we can go through it in a second, but I want to flip back, if I can, to this. So here's the idea. Alex, he's going to buy the house, right? Home ownership is very important to him. So he's going to take his $50,000 that he has saved up, and he's going to make that his down payment on the house, and then he's going to take out a mortgage of $450,000 to cover the rest of the purchase price. On the other hand, Sam, he's decided that he doesn't need to own the house. He just wants to live in it, right? He has a certain standard of living that he wants to live in, so he's going to rent that house, but he doesn't need to own it. So here's what the costs are per month, right, for each of these two people. Now, these costs are based on certain assumptions that I made. First of all, for example, like I assumed that the mortgage rate was 6.5%, okay? So if the mortgage rate's lower, that makes buying the home more attractive, right? Indeed, that's what the app here that I created is supposed to show, right? So for example, if we lowered the mortgage rate, now you see the blue line represents Sam, which is the renter. The green line is Alex, and he's the buyer. So if we lowered the mortgage rate for the buyer back to where it was, pre-pandemic, all of a sudden now Alex's home equity looks really good. Okay? So again, the numbers that I put in here are dependent on these values. And I encourage you, if you can get access to the app, just go out and play with it and see what they look like. But if we put in the values that are consistent with the historical averages in the U.S. economy, what I'm showing you here is what will play out. Okay? So this is sort of based on the historical averages of things like mortgages and returns and that sort of thing. So what we see again is what? That at the end of the month, right, Alex is paying $830 more to buy the house every month, right, than Sam is to rent it. And again, they're getting, in terms of the housing services, right, in terms of what it is to live in that house, they're getting very close to the same thing. I don't want to act like that's true, though, completely, right? The owner of the house can do what? They can make changes, redecorate, right? They can do whatever they want to the property. The renter can't do that. And so there are limitations to renting. And so there are benefits at the margin, right, to buyers that the renter doesn't get. The key is, are those benefits worth what? $830 more a month. And it's not just $830 more a month. That's just the opportunity cost, right? Because, again, if Sam is disciplined, he's going to do what with his $830 a month? He's going to invest it. He's going to invest in a well-diversified portfolio of assets. And again, in the calculations I made, I assume he only earns 7% a year, right? Where again, the stock market on average over 30 years produces about 10% a year. So even with this conservative calculation, the renter is much better off 10 years down the road, right? So again, the point of this analysis is what? That our initial reaction is that home buying is a important economic milestone. Purchasing the home is like sort of built into the culture, right? But it turns out that if we analyze the underlying marginal costs and marginal benefits, it turns out maybe buying the house isn't the right way to go. Or is it? Okay. I do have it factored in. The app has a 3%. The app has a 3% increase in rent every year.
I just say we're talking about rent going up
Well,
every month.
I'll have to tell you.
And then I know the equity in my house we can borrow on. We could do a lot of things with it. Like I can get a HELOC.
To do what with what? What you're going to do?
If I wanted to, I could cash flow it. To invest in something else.
Okay.
Cash flow.
Again, that's you haven't undermined anything I've said.
I'm not undermining you at all. I'm just saying you're saying, well, this looks what it looks on paper. I think it depends situation.
Sure.
Where you buy. I mean, our value appreciated so much. We've greatly exceeded what we would have paid in rent than the valuation of our house on what our return
again
is.
So that's true again, and it is like it is time dependent. So one of the things is, look, there's a cycle to the housing market, and so again, I don't want to address like specifics of the housing market in particular. This is a sort of a generic example of how to use these tools. But let me just say something. I am also I own rental property as well. I know the market very well. Rents are going down. They're not going up. House prices have been going up. They've moderated now. They basically stalled here for a year or so. My suspicion is, and again, I have actual research. I have a research paper, and I'm happy to send it to anybody. Send me an email, and I'll send you my research on this. The rents are the anchor to the house price rent relationship. And as rents go down, that predicts house prices will fall. That's just my, based on my research, what I would say. So going to the HELOC, what you've done there is you just decided that the equity you might build in your house is not growing at a fast enough rate compared to the other investments you could make. Right. Oh, right. You could pay off a credit card that charges a much higher interest rate. And that's perfectly. But that's true for any asset. If you had a bank account that you had $100,000 in, it doesn't. Your home equity isn't anything special in that regard. Any asset would have provided you those opportunities, right? So it's not housing. Yes.
Including your 3% increase in rent?
Yeah. So let me just go back to the app, just so that everybody sort of understands what's going on here in this app, right? So again, we're starting off with the $500,000 home price, $50,000 down payment. Here's the mortgage rate. So what's the current mortgage rate? I don't know. 6.5%. I thought that was a
6 and 8% on.
Okay, so we can go. So let's go mortgage. Let's put the mortgage rate at 7%, just somewhere in between 6 and 8, right? Okay. Now, what's the monthly rent right now on that same property? And as I said, my experience right now is that you can rent these properties for 20 or 30% less than what the monthly mortgage, insurance, interest all in is. And so is $2,500 too low?
If we're looking at a 30-year mortgage, that's going up, what, 3% each year? Or are you talking?
The house is appreciating. So the value of the house is increasing 3% per year. Do you want it to go up more?
Okay, no. For renters, if it were to go up 3% each year on that same.
So right
30-year
here, rent increase, 3%, right? Rent increase down there.
My question here is, if you have a fixed mortgage that your mortgage doesn't change every single year.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Indeed.
Eventually, your renters are going to catch up, and
okay. So here's the amortization schedule too, right here. So let's just look at what this is telling us. I know what you guys are saying, and I understand your instinct. The problem is the only part of your mortgage, the only part of the house buying payment that's locked in, that's protected from inflation, is that mortgage. The rest of your costs go up with inflation, just like rent does, right?
Home insurance,
all of that, and indeed some of that stuff goes up faster than the price of inflation, and then renters don't have to pay any of that.
I mean, you don't want your taxes to go down. That would mean your property value is going down. The area that you're living in is going down, right? Because if you have,
you went off on a total.
No. For taxes wise, like you're saying that the taxes go up every year, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, though, right?
Well, again, that's a different issue.
Okay. We don't have to go off on that issue.
That's a different rabbit hole.
Okay, we'll stick to my question then. Does the renter ever catch up?
Yeah, does he?
3%,
Does he? Yeah, he does, right? The renter eventually does catch up. The difference is, though, what? That he's earned so much in that savings account that it more than makes up for the extra rent, right, that he's paying. So down here at the bottom, you can see.
How much does he have in his savings account after the 30 years?
That's what this graphic is showing us.
Right. What is it saying, though? What does it show?
Here's year 30, so he's got what? There you go. 1.5 million to 1.2 million.
Yeah,
300,000.
Your house is definitely not worth the 1.5 million after the 30 years.
Well, again, you say that, except that home ownership is an incredibly risky investment, right? Again, that's the other thing too. It's a very illiquid asset, very costly to sell, right? So again, I'm not trying to convince anybody one way or the other. I'm simply trying to make the argument that if we measure marginal costs and marginal benefits, right, what we'll find is the economic decision is often doesn't pay to buy, pays to rent. But here's the problem. This is the sort of key message of today, right, of my talk is, yes, the economic decision might say one thing, but are you really going to be disciplined enough to take the extra money that you would have spent on the mortgage and invest it religiously into your mutual fund or whatever? Are you going to do that? How many people can really do that? And the answer is not many, right? And it turns out then that the behavioral reality, right, the rational choice would be don't buy. But the behavioral reality is I'm likely to just spend that extra money anyway every month, and therefore, by having the mortgage, by buying the house, I'm engaged in what is effectively a forced savings. By paying off the mortgage over time, I'm building the equity, and as a sense, I'm forcing myself to save every month. And so again, for that reason, it probably does make sense for most people to buy, right? Again, this is what I'm saying is the economics way of thinking about it isn't necessarily the right decision. It forms a benchmark from which to compare. And now at least, right, Alex and Sam know, they know what the marginal cost, marginal benefit is. The buyer knows, it's cost me $830 a month to buy this house. But given, my propensity to charge up the credit card and whatever else, this is a good decision for me because behaviorally, I know this is going to make me better off in the long run. So again, there's the economic answer, and then there's the behavioral answer. And again, the behavioral answer isn't wrong. One of the things that's super important is economists, we think of, what we're basically doing as economists is we're trying to find out what the perfectly rational person would do. The thing is, no such being exists, right? There is no such thing as the perfectly rational person. What we do then is that forms sort of, like I said, the benchmark, and then we can compare behavioral outcomes to what the model tells us. What about something maybe a little closer to home? The economics of college, right? It turns out that I talk to students all the time who come to me late in their college career regretting the decisions they made, right? Regretting the choices that they made along the way. And as I said earlier, this is really one of the most consequential decisions that you'll make in your life, whether or not to go to college, where to go to college, what to major in, right? Whether or not to work part-time, whether or not to take out student loans to finance your education. These are super consequential decisions, and it turns out we don't really do a very good job in our society of providing young people the tools, again, to be able to make these kinds of decisions. And so, again, I think economics can help inform people about this. So, education, your college education isn't just about being educated. It's really, in some sense, an investment, right? This is an investment. Indeed, what economists call this is an investment in human capital, right? Capital is like building machines and factories, right? Well, this is human capital. This is the capital that's embodied in you. It's your knowledge and your skills. And so this really is, in that sense, an investment, just like buying stock in the stock market or buying a house for that matter. So again, just like an investment, you're incurring costs up front with the expectation that those costs will be recouped, right? At some point in the future. Just like any other investment, that's the expectation. So, again, let's talk about opportunity cost again in the context of college education. So, let's say you could earn $30,000 per year working full-time. Over 4 years, that's $120,000. Is $120,000 really the right number? Why not? What did I not do there?
You're not saying if there's taxes being taken out or spending.
Okay, so that's that. So I didn't do the taxes.
Gas to get to work.
Okay, but the other thing, the concept we talked about earlier, over 4 years, right? The cost in year one is not the same as right? There's a time value to that money. So again, we have to, if we're going to do this exactly the right way, we should account for the time value. So I'm kind of, doing it back of the envelope calculations here, right? That's what we're trying to get at. So, and then when we talk about how much you actually spend in tuition over the 4 years, right? Assuming that you finish in 4 years. Most students, by the way, now take 5, right, to finish their degree. So your true college expense might be closer to $200,000 or $300,000. That's a lot of, when you think about it in those terms, that's how much you might need to start a small business, right? To fund your business operation. So again, in this sense, it very much is an investment. Now, I've got 3 scenarios here, and again, these are just demonstration scenarios, but it's essentially the effects on your lifetime earnings from either going to college or not going to college, or going to college but making some really bad decisions when you did, okay? So the idea is pretty straightforward. We can see that this yellow line represents what your earnings would be if you just started work right out of high school. So you decided not to go to college, and you just decided, I'm going to just go to work, and I'm going to develop skills on the job, and that's the path I'm going to take. So what happens, of course, is because you do develop skills on the job, because you get better at what you do, you learn new things, your income rose over time. You become more productive, right? You learn by doing, okay? And so the yellow line shows again, a progression of income over your career. So 15 years in, you're earning now the equivalent of, well, I have 400K here. That's probably a artifact of the numbers that I pumped in. But the point is that that sort of represents the default, if you will, right? The baseline, right? Now, if you go to college, given the opportunity costs that we've just discussed, your actual income is going to look something like this, right? While you're in college, your ability to earn is going to be diminished. And so the costs associated with attending school are effectively going to make your disposable income lower than it otherwise would have been. This is what you could have had you skipped college. This is what you're actually getting. Why are you willing to suffer this? Because the payoff down the road. down the road, the idea then is that once I graduate, once I start working with my degree, the income increases will be greater over time than it would have been if I just had a high school degree. And as a consequence, eventually I'll start out earning what I would have earned earlier. And of course, for most people, that occurs right around year 10. Right around year 10 after college, somewhere between year 5 and year 10 is when the college degree holders start out earning the same person who had started at the same path right out of high school, right? Now, what about the red line? Well, let me relate an anecdote. So this is about 10 years ago, but we were at Jamestown, Virginia. It's a national park now. It's it's a lot of historic sites, very interesting to visit. While we were there, I began talking with one of the tour guides, very nice young lady, and we had lunch together. And she told me that over lunch, this was the job that she had been working at for about 18 months, and she had gotten a degree from Brown University in history. And she was complaining that she couldn't keep up with her student loans and that it was really difficult to make ends meet. And everything she told me was essentially the kind of decision that led to that red line, right? Whereas the choices along the way that she made, she didn't really think about the marginal costs and marginal benefits. She basically only thought about her own preferences and that sort of thing. And as a consequence, made some bad decisions. Okay, so key concept number 1, right? The opportunity cost. So when we think about college decisions, the question is, what's the opportunity cost of going to college versus working right out of school? So for most of us, working right out of high school, we're probably going to earn minimum wage, maybe a little more than that to begin with. And then again, as you build your skills, you'll start earning more rapidly. But for some of us, that's not true. My son has a friend. The friend's family owns a large business. And so right out of high school, the son was able to start working right away and earning a high income. And so in that case, that young guy's opportunity cost to go to school was much higher than the average person. And therefore, a perfectly rational decision for him to do what? To forego college and enter the... It turns out he didn't. He ended up going to college anyway because of why? To him, it wasn't about the money. Right? And that's another thing we'll talk about here, right? College isn't always about the money. This isn't only about the investment part. But again, we have to think about the investment part when we're making these decisions. So again, it's also whether or not to work while you're in school. Because when you work while you're in school, that takes time away from the ultimate objective of earning the degree, right? And so every hour you're working for pay, and presumably for pay that's going to be lower right now than what it would be once you finish your degree, right? You can see that there's an interesting trade-off here between working today at a low wage or focusing everything on my college, getting that over quick, and then earning the higher wage up here. That's the kind of the opportunity cost that we have to consider. And then again, how much debt is reasonable to take on? Well, it turns out that question depends on your major. That depends on what skill set it is that you're actually in school learning. So again, the time value of money is a really important consideration here. And because again, you're paying for these costs, this $200,000 or $300,000 for educational costs up front, but you're not getting the benefits, the return from it until, many, many years throughout the rest of your life. And so for that reason, the time value, converting these values to present value is critically important. And again, this is the only equation I threw up in the entire slide, and I only did it so that if anybody goes back and wants to be able to calculate it themselves, they can do so. But again, just to show you that the way to convert future values to present value is to discount them, and that rate that we're discounting them there, I, is dependent on each individual person. You have your own discount rate. You have your own preferences for how much the future is valuable to you versus the past. So the third concept related to education, related to college education, is the rate of return. The rate of return that you're going to get on your degree. So again, the stock market comparison that we want to use is about 10% a year for the stock market. And so it turns out that we can get data and calculate what the returns to various college degrees are. This chart isn't exhaustive, but it sort of gives you a broad guideline to the rates of return for various undergraduate majors at the university. And so, the idea then is, is debt a good idea to take on? Well, again, that depends on the return that you expect to get once you're out and working after your degree is earned, right? And so that informs you to a large extent. There is a great website, and I encourage you to go out and look at it right here. It's listed here in the slide. It's the Brookings Institution created it. It's called the Hamilton Project. It's named after Alexander Hamilton, the former head of the U.S. Treasury. The point, though, is that this particular link, let's see if I can. This particular link will take you to a website, and this website essentially has calculated the lifetime earnings for any major at the university. So we can compare high school degree, right? Look at all the majors that they have. And so again, we can look at what the lifetime earnings are, again, for somebody having a degree in biology. And I encourage you to use this kind of information because this is the kind of information that will inform you about the kinds of returns that you can expect from the degree that you earn, right? So the returns that you earn are going to be dependent on the major you choose, and that's going to affect the choice in whether or not you want to choose a particular major. So, going to university, going to college in general, has a very high payoff. As we see here, for the lifetime, over a person's lifetime of earnings, which is about 40 years, right? So we basically assume that you're finishing school about the age of 28, 27, and you're going to work until 67. So it's about a 40-year lifespan that we're talking about here in terms of work time, right? And you're expected to earn almost $1 million more than somebody. And that number, by the way, is corrected for the present value. So that is a present value number, right? It's discounted for all the future. Remember, this is just an average, though. The actual premium depends on your major, the school you attend. If you attend Harvard, it is a much higher premium than if you attend UT Arlington. Sorry, it's just the truth, right? Your performance. This is key. This is sort of the know thyself part of college education, right? If you're not the person that's willing to put the time and the effort to perform well in school, then maybe school isn't really the right choice for you. So the performance really helps drive the return to these degrees. And of course, the career path you choose. If you choose a path that's private sector, public sector, nonprofit, right? Those all have influences on your lifetime earnings. And then one that's kind of interesting, and it's completely out of your control, but the economic conditions when you graduate. It turns out there's lots of research that shows that when students that graduate and come out in a year that we're in a recession, and so there's high unemployment, those students have lower lifetime income forever. So if you can modify your timing on when you graduate and come out during the expansion, that actually has an effect. Now, we're not talking about huge differences, right? We're talking about a couple $1,000s over the course of your lifetime, but it's statistically significant, and so it does show up in the data. Oh, of course, absolutely. It's just, yeah, it is, but let's be clear about something. The cost of living in Northern California is much higher than it is here. And so are the wages. The real wage there is actually just about the same as it is here. You follow? And so in that sense, the location isn't as important. But it does matter, right? Like if you're going to get a degree in engineering, you're probably not going to get too many jobs, up in Billings, Montana. right? You're probably going to have to be in Austin or Silicon Valley or something like that. So the point is, yes, location certainly, I think, would be something to add to the list in terms of the return depends on it. Let's just quickly talk about student loans, right? Because again, this is one of the areas where I see students really getting themselves in trouble. Here's the key. 96% of student loans are current, there's only a small, tiny fraction of student loans that are in default. And it turns out the overwhelming majority of student loan defaults are people that didn't finish the degree, right? So if you're going to take out debt to finance your education, finish the education, get the degree. That's sort of the first key to the student loan issue. Then it's simply a matter of comparing the rate that you have to pay on your student loan to the rate of return that you expect to get from your degree. So again, if you take out a government student loan that charges 6% interest, but you're getting your degree in social work, and therefore we know that that only has about a 3% return annually, that's probably not a good trade, right? You're paying more than you're going to expect to earn. So in that case, again, the economics would suggest, now here's the thing. What if you really love social work and you're willing to, undertake that expense in order to get trained to help people, right? If that's important enough to you, then that should be the decision you make. The point, though, is knowing what it is, knowing the cost that you're actually incurring, knowing the marginal benefit that you expect to receive from that is really a key to the decision. As this sort of leads me into this next slide, right? Your passion versus the paycheck. How important is loving what you do, feeling, self-actualized and everything every day versus what the job pays, right? Some jobs that have very high compensation aren't that fun to do. Indeed, that's why they have high compensation, right? It's called compensating wage. And so the point is that that's up to you. You have to decide, what your trade-offs are in terms of your passion versus the return on the degree. I want to highlight again, I'm an educator. I've been doing this for a long time, so I don't want to discourage anybody from going to college, right? Please come to college. But understand that your degree's value isn't just financial. Right? There's a lot of other what we call positive externalities that come from you getting a degree. One of the reasons that the state and federal government subsidizes college education to the degree that it does is because the broader society benefits. The more college educated citizens we have, the better off we all are, it turns out, right? That's what all the data show us. And so it turns out there's lots of other benefits to getting a college degree that aren't necessarily monetary. Okay? And again, some of them are listed there. There may be others that I may have missed. So when might college not pay off? Well, obviously, taking on too much debt is a bad idea. And that's not just for college, of course. That's for anything. Attending private schools when a quality state option exists, right? So the key to private school attendance is got to get those scholarships. If you can get those scholarships, get them to pay down the tuition, then the private school can pay off. But again, when you have good state options available, those are usually your best choice, at least, on a cost-benefit basis. Taking a long time, right? Every year you spend in school, that increases your opportunity cost. Your opportunity cost is rising. And so the cost of the degree increases. So graduating on time is really helpful. And then, of course, the last one I mentioned earlier, not taking academics seriously. And I see this a lot, unfortunately, because again, much like home ownership, college degrees are kind of seen culturally as sort of a benchmark or a step on the ladder of life. And people, I think, jump into college without really, comprehending and taking on the effort level that is required in order to succeed. So again, the behavioral reality versus the economic decision. The economic decision might be, the field that I want to go into doesn't have a high return, and therefore college doesn't make a lot of sense. But I'm so, motivated and animated to do it, then that's the choice I'm going to make. But again, just like every investment, we got to understand the costs And the key costs that economists always want to point out are the opportunity costs, because those are the costs that people often ignore. Making informed decisions about the financing is very critical. Again, the rates of return compared to the costs. Actively working to maximize your return, that simply means putting the effort in, right, for the degree. And then the last one, I guess, is having realistic expectations about the outcomes. The university is not, it's not like a Willy Wonka golden ticket, right? It's not gonna provide the answer to everything, but it is a really valuable asset. And that's the way I think that, is most useful thinking about it. Final thoughts. So my overarching talk today is really, again, just sort of how do economists approach decision making? How do economists think about things? And the bottom line for economists is marginal cost, marginal benefit. It sort of forms the basis of all the decision making that economics is itself based on. And so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to take any questions. And if you guys want to go back and talk about the macroeconomy, I'm happy to do that too. If you guys have questions about what's going on in the economy as well. Anybody? Well, let me just talk a little bit about the economy real quick then, just to sort of maybe spur some questions. So it's like Dickens. This is the best of times, it is the worst of times, right? The economy is very unsettled. It seems that the Federal Reserve has achieved soft landing. We had very high inflation following the COVID stimulus. One of the things that my wife told me a couple weeks ago, she goes, "The inflation's crazy." And I said, "Well, hold on, inflation's come back down." And she goes, "Well, the prices haven't." And that's the problem. I think there's a misunderstanding, and even my wife misunderstood. Once the inflation happens, that's the new permanent level of the prices, right? Even if inflation comes down, it doesn't mean those prices are going to come down, right? The inflation's actually the rate of increase. And so all we're saying here is that the rate of increase is now lower than it was before. So it is the case that inflation's down much closer to the Federal Reserve's target. The Federal Reserve's target inflation is 2% for the economy. In last quarter that we have the most recent available data, I think inflation was 2.4%. So we're a little high, but that's not so much higher that we have to hit the panic button or anything like that. The other side of it is real GDP growth, right? So real GDP growth in quarter two was something like 2.1%, and the year earlier is 2.4. Those are what I would call average numbers, right? Not really high, but not low either. Not something that I would normally be concerned about. So that looks like we're sort of at, yeah.
I'm not getting into politics or something like that. The question is, you see about the tariffs the government is putting on the different countries, but why we are forgetting, like, we are importing all these big things from China and different countries like that. For example, you take, I was looking online the other day, baby strollers and all. Who makes it? China. All the strollers and everything. If they're going to put more tariffs on these countries, how are we going to import it? We should not only think about getting more monies from other countries, we should don't you think, like, think about create a good connection or relation between the other countries so our import and export is good. And one time we are saying, okay, 145% tariff, and then the other day we are telling, like, okay, now 50% tariff. So
what's been the effect of the tariffs? Does anybody notice anything? See, one of the problems is, like, as an economist, we tell a story about free trade, but it's a super oversimplified story that doesn't explain all the complexities, okay? Look, the free trade argument works really great when you're just talking about me exchanging something with you, right? But when we scale up to countries, that level, it becomes very complicated, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. Let me say this about the tariffs, okay? Who pays? Do we? I don't know, because that's not happened so far. What's happened so far is what? The companies, the foreign companies, have eaten the tariffs. Right? That's right. They've decided to do what? Eat the tariffs and maintain their market share. So what effect has that had on the U.S. consumer? Not much, right? And so that's what I'm getting at, is that there's a lot of margins here that, right, we think maybe it'll go this way. That's what we all sort of predicted when the tariffs were put in place. Hasn't worked out that way, right? And so again, the other side of it too is, at some point we should make some things locally, right? There is I think a legitimate national security argument, for example, to be able to make some basic medicines and things like that locally, so that if in a case of an emergency, you're not reliant on a foreign producer. So I think there are some arguments like that. Are we running out of time? Oh, okay, good.
Expand on cost of living and inflation, because those are two separate things, right?
Well, they're not really, because, okay, so again, inflation, first of all, it's a broad kind of term, and it's related to the price level. And what's the price level? Well, it's kind of the average prices of goods. It's a hard concept to wrap your brain around because it's not really well defined, okay? But the idea is like, let's say we have these measures of the price level. One of the most common is something called the CPI. You guys have probably heard of it, the Consumer Price Index. So how do they calculate this measure of the prices in the economy? So they literally have created a basket of goods that they have determined represents the average consumer bundle for the American household, right? So they did the research, figured this is what Americans on average buy every month in the average American household. So what is the cost of this bundle? And that's what they do. Every month, they send people out to get the prices of these goods, and they record them, and then month to month, that's how the index is created, okay? So that's one way. The problem with that index, though, is it doesn't include any of the prices that aren't included in the bundle, right? Like, for example, there are things like that the government buys, like an aircraft carrier, right? Government buys an aircraft carrier. That doesn't get included in the CPI index, but it does add to the overall cost of producing everything else, right? So there are other measures as well. One's called the GDP deflator, and it turns out that's the one that's preferred by the Fed. And the reason they prefer that one is because it's a broader index. It covers more of the prices, right, in the economy. And so you could argue that the inflation in the GDP deflator is the change in the cost of living, since it's covering effectively all the goods and services that are being sold in the economy. And so, again, you brought this up yourself in other contexts earlier. Location matters. The region matters. Certain regions of the country see higher inflation than others. So again, one of the things that's sort of nice about North Texas is we haven't really seen, a lot of the really high inflation effects that other parts of the country have. Maybe the housing sector being the exception there. We have seen a little bit of a run up there the last few years. But again, in terms of the tariffs, yeah, I know everybody had an expectation that they were going to be terrible and have this. Here's the problem. Like, when I came out of graduate school, I was a total free trade guy right down the middle, right? Tariffs are awful, they're bad. The problem is that, when you consider the scale, just take the Chinese labor markets, 500 million, right? 500 million workers between 18 and 40. In the U.S., that's like 130 million. So they can swamp our labor market several times over. Should we allow them to do? Should we make that happen just because there's some economic free trade argument? I don't know. I do worry, for example, that when people's jobs are more than just the job. Like, one of the things that we're really good at in economics is we're good at measuring the benefits of the free trade, like all the lower cost for all the goods and stuff that we get. We're not really good about measuring the cost of that. When somebody loses their job in Ohio because the factory moved to China or India or something like that, it's more than just the $50,000 a year he was earning or whatever, right? The cost to that family, the cost to the community, we don't measure those. And one of the things we always tell students in our classes is, well, we could devise a scheme, because it is true, mathematically it's true, that the gains from trade exceed those costs. The problem is the gains don't, the people that are bearing the cost are bearing the huge cost, where the gains are just a little bit for each of us, right? We're each saving $20 on our shirt or something like that. But the guy who lost his job and, kids have to drop out of school, somebody becomes drug addicted, and all of a sudden now the cost to society start to become much bigger than just the $50,000 a year job. And so that's what I'm saying, is that there's a lot of complexity and margins in these problems. The primary issue is they don't scale up. What works at the individual level doesn't necessarily work at the macro or scaled up level. And a great example of that's communism. One of the reasons my colleagues go, why does communism keep coming back? What's going on with that? And it's because the truth is communism works. But it only works at the individual level, right? It only works at the level of your family. Every family, for the most part, lives communist principles, right? Those who can, mom and dad, they go out and do. Those who need, the kids, they receive, right? We grew up in communist environments. The problem is that environment requires regulation, it requires oversight, it requires one of the things about that makes economic interaction so difficult is something called asymmetric information. I know more about something than you might, or vice versa. And as a consequence, I have more power in that relationship, right? I have more, because my knowledge is greater, I might be able to manipulate you into making a bad choice. That happens in a free market. The problem is when you're in a family, there's the incentive to do that is greatly diminished. As that expands, by the way, we call that moral hazard. We call it the asymmetric information is adverse selection and then moral hazard. And the bottom line is that as you scale this up, the asymmetric information problem becomes worse. Look at home, mom can see if Johnny's taking the garbage out, right? But at the macro level, we can't determine if everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing in our system. And so the point is that these are systems that work really well at the micro level. They work really well at the individual level. So free trade's one of them. You and I engaging in our free exchange with no interference from anybody else, that makes perfect sense. When you scale that up to companies and countries now there's a whole game theory dynamic that changes everything. Anybody else? Just real quick. Yeah.
What do you think about the economics, how our country is growing, or what, if you take this year and the last 3 years ago, what do you think, we are growing or we are going more?
Yeah, no, as I said, what I think has happened is we're kind of at a as I said before, they call it the soft landing, right? There's no recession on the horizon, but I wouldn't also say there's no prospects for this huge burst of, growth either. I don't see that happening either. It looks like we're sort of hit this sort of equilibrium. We're just sort of, again, one of the things that happens is that most economic, systems, most economic events are driven by exogenous crises or something like that. And so I can't predict that, right? I can't predict where the next war will break out or natural disaster or something like that. But again, it's a good time. The world has never been as rich as it is today. The technology's never been as advanced as it is today. There's never been as many opportunities as there are today. So if I were a young person, I'd be very optimistic.
What about our government just shut down?
What are they doing for you? No, where do you get that idea? You control the country, right? You. No, the government doesn't do that.
That AI is contributing a lot, and so people think that there's a bubble or something like that. How would you evaluate those claims?
So I lived through the internet. This will be my last one because I know we're running out of time. I lived through the development of the internet. Same thing. Everybody got crazy excited in the late 90s about the internet. And of course, now it's just, we've all learned to adapt to it. I think that's exactly what's going to happen with AI. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Let's give Dr. Crowder a hand for coming in. Thank you. I'm going to paste the...